What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and welcome back for another episode of Pograms. Today we're going to be taking a look at a hand that a lot of people have been talking about from the Millionaire Maker event at the World Series of Poker. What I think makes this hand so interesting is the pressure that's put on one of the players at the table due to the ICM situation between the bigger stacks in the tournament and then lots of other people on smaller stacks looking to ladder. But before we jump into this hand, I want to let you guys know that we have an upcoming MTT course with Nick Petrangelo, and if you guys want to check out a promotional video we put up to help you guys learn more about tournament play, you can check it out in the description below. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into this hand from the Millionaire Maker.
Or the cardiac tenacity for any form of marathon, physical or mental.
Ikeuchi putting so much pressure on Albertson's open from the button.
Corey obviously in fantastic shape with the ace-king suited.
Yeah, Albertson knows that it's disastrous if he goes all in here and gets called, but he has such a good hand. And I like this call because you don't want to put all the chips in and get called.
Yeah, of course
Really disastrous, but you can't fold your hand. It's too strong. You have position.
Before we jump into the hand itself, let's take a look at the stack sizes and the payouts so we can understand what makes this spot so interesting. We got Ikeuchi on 86 million and then Albertson on 54 million, and those are going to be the two people in this hand. After that, we've got a pretty big drop off. We have a 36 million stack and then a bunch of small stacks on between 13 to 17 million. If we now take a look at the payouts, you can see the problem for the bigger stacks here. First place is 1.3 million and thus the Millionaire Maker, and then it drops off to 830 for second, 620k for third, 464 for fourth, 350 and 266. So we've got a pretty big drop off here as you ladder up. And if you're the player on 54 million or 86 million or even 36 million, you might be thinking, okay, if I just let a couple people bust here, I could probably double my money, especially if I let 3 people bust. I go from being paid 266 all the way up to 619. So well over 2x here just by letting the short stacks bust. And that's what creates some real tension in this hand. The action kicks off folding to Albertson on the button, who looks down at ace-king suited. This is a clear open, obviously. Now, we're going to be playing a little bit tighter here on the button than we might in some situations because the small blind is a short stack who can definitely jam over our open, and the big blind is the biggest stack in the tournament, so it's not exactly a super awesome spot to be opening. We do want to think about these stacks, though, in blinds, not just number of chips. The big blind is currently 1.6 million, so we see Albertson on the button sitting with something in the vicinity of 35 blinds. The small blind is on 8.5 blinds, and the big blind is on a little bit over 50 blinds. So we see, some deeper play here from the button, the big blind, but a lot of very short stacks in the tournament. So on this 34-ish blind stack for Albertson on the button, we're definitely going to want to be a little bit conservative, but we're not going to be going too tight. And also, we've got a really good hand, so it doesn't really matter in this spot specifically, but I want to give you some insight into the way you should be playing this button if you had a hand that was a little bit more marginal. Now, he does decide to open up the ace-king suited to a little bit over min, which looks fine. The small blind gets out of the way, and now the big blind decides he's going to play his hand. With king 10 offsuit, I'd probably lean towards a call. And I think that there's a couple of different ways you can approach 3-betting the big blind. I think a lot of players go for a more linear 3-bet range, which means they're going to be 3-betting mainly just good hands between pretty good and very good, and less bluffs. Or you can go for a more polarized strategy where you put some very weak hands in your 3-bet range to put pressure on the button. Well, I think in this spot specifically, given the pressure the big blind can put on the button, I think I'd go for a 3-bet range that's not going to have as many king 10s, and it's going to have more premium hands like ace king, high pairs, that type of thing, and some very bluffy bluffs like 5-4 suited, a 4-3 suited, hands that are pretty weak and you gain a lot by forcing them off their equity. And the reason is that I think the button is going to have to play very straightforward and honest against you, because if he doesn't, you can stack him. And so in situations like that where you think people, even if they think you're bluffing, they're going to play straightforward, I prefer to have a polarized 3-bet range to make more money. Anyway, the big blind disagrees and decides to 3-bet his king 10, which is probably still going to be a winning play. I just prefer to pick other hands. Now the action's back over to the button. He's got 34 big blinds and ace king suited. Now, I know this is a scary spot, guys. I understand. We've done plenty of these on poker hands before where someone is in a big spot for their tournament life. But you simply have to go all in here. There's no choice. It might seem kind of scary to move in here, and it is somewhat scary. Once in a while, you're going to jam, he's going to snap you off with aces, and it's over. You get 6th place money instead of what could have been 2nd or 3rd, or even 1st place money. But there's a reason why going all in is important here. And the reason is that when you jam, you're simply not busting the tournament that much. There's a huge difference in these spots between calling an all in and going all in yourself. And the reason is simple. It's because of fold equity. When you go all in, he still has to call. Now, how much will the big blind be calling in the spot? Let's try and figure out some rough numbers. The first question you have to ask yourself is how much should the big blind be 3-betting? And typically in a big blind button scenario, you're going to want to 3-bet something around 10-ish% on deeper stacks. As it gets shorter, that might change in a different direction. So let's just go ahead and assume the big blind might 3-betting around 10%. It's very likely in this spot specifically that the big blind, because he is the chip leader and he knows the pressure he's putting on you, it could definitely get closer to 12 or 14%. But let's go on the conservative side here for the sake of analysis. Now, I've pulled up Equilab here to walk you through why I think that you have to call, why you think you have to jam rather. So 70%-ish of the time you're going to jam, he's going to fold, and you're going to win what is a pretty large pot. The pot is currently 17 million. That's going to be quite the pickup for you, and you're going to be right around even with the big stack now, maybe a little bit less. So not only do I think that he mainly folds, but now the table is turning, right? He has to be careful against you, and it allows you to play looser in the tournament. So there's also some value in the chips that you gain. So 70% of the time, you're now even-ish with the biggest stack. 16% of the time you bust, which does suck. You are only paid out the 6th place payout. But then 14% of the time, you have an almost insurmountable chip lead. You're going to be on 110 million chips here, by far and away likely to win the tournament and put immense pressure on the other players at the table. So really, it's not as risky as it might feel. Now, yes, 1 out of 6-ish times you do bust the tournament, but all of the other scenarios are very good for you. Also, his fold might be much higher. Yes, he might only call 10s plus, in which case our bust frequency when he does calls goes down. Maybe this ends up being closer to 17%. This is 13%. But this assumes he's only folding 70% to you. If you think he's getting out of line and might have crazy hands like, I don't know, let's just say king 10. All of a sudden, he's going to be folding a lot more than it might seem like he would be folding given a normal big blind 3-bet range. So I think this is simply a mandatory jam. I don't think it's very close. You also have to consider the fact that because you do have an ace and a king, there's card removal at play. He's less likely to call your jam. This could realistically be 80-85% fold to jam, in which case, you're absolutely stone printing with an all-in here. Just because it's a lot of money, you can't play afraid, and I think that probably played a decent-sized role here for our hero on the button. Anyway, Albertson does decide to call, and let's take a flop.
With a great hand and Jack 9-7 2 clubs, this is good stuff for Albertson, but a double gut shot straight draw for Ikeuchi, who has control of the betting here. 24.6 million chips in the middle thus far.
Check.
And Kazuki decides to check Maria.
Now, one thing about these ICM spots is when you flop a hand that has so much equity, such as ace, king of clubs, that has 2 overs to this board, that has a nut flush draw, you want to be able to realize your equity. You don't want to be blown off of it. And if you bet here and Ikeuchi puts you all in, you can't really call off, even if you are getting the right price. You just feel really dirty about doing that as the second chip stack.
With so many shorties out there and so many big pay jumps there, ICM, of course, independent chip modeling in reference to the actual real-world value of each of these tournament chips that are sitting in front of each of these players.
I think Albertson should check back here, hope to realize his equity.
It feels absurd to do it. Everything about your poker instinct says just pile. What's the worst that can happen? You have ace, king of clubs. But stop, take a breath, survey the scenario, and ask yourself, do you really want to get involved with the chip leader, the one man that can bust you here?
Right, and recognize that Ikeuchi, after 3-betting you, definitely has some check jams here that he would take once you bet. he definitely has value here that he's going to try to blow you off all types of hands.
That's 7.7.
A double gut shot with the backdoor club is great.
Oh my goodness, Ikeuchi wastes no time saying all in.
I'm almost positive I can't fold, but I definitely need a minute. Wow.
And this is exactly what I'm talking about.
Corey fires and instantly gets piled on. What an awful spot.
The flop comes Jack 9-7 with 2 clubs. Definitely enough for both players to look to put some chips in the middle. King 10 flops a double gutter with an over, and he does have a club as well. Not the most relevant. And the button flops the nut flush draw. We've got 25 million in the pot, and the button has 43 million behind. And so now for the big blind, there's a bit of an awkward problem. If he bets and gets jammed on, he's probably going to have to fold. If he goes all in himself, his opponent could just play perfectly and call with good hands and fold the medium to bad ones. So what does he decide to do? And I like this decision. He decides to check. Some newer players might be thinking, why check? We have a draw. Shouldn't we bluff to try and get our opponent to fold? And I think the answer to that is yes. I think betting could also be a pretty reasonable decision here. But this is why I think I like check more. If we bet and our opponent jams, we're going to have to bet fold. And that's not really what we want to do here on a double gutter. If we hit a queen, we have the nuts, and if we hit an 8, we're very likely good unless he's got specifically queen 10. So we would much prefer to check and try and realize our equity. Additionally, on club turns, we pick up a flush draw. A king is almost certainly good for a top pair. A 10 could show down. We just have so much playability with this hand, and if we bet and get jammed on, it's a really unfortunate spot. It's much better to check here, if our opponent checks back. We can look to bluff or value bet some later streets and fill out our ranges for both of those lines. Now, there's another cool part about checking too, which is if you think your opponent might take a lot of stabs, you can go all in. What makes this spot especially good for that is that the button is in a very scary spot where if he calls your jam, he could be eliminated. And so there are lots of hands that might bet and really not want to face a jam at all that are going to have to face one. So I really like the way that Ikeuchi decides to play this in the big blind. Over to Albertson, this is a bit of an interesting situation. He's got 2 options. He can check or he can bet and decide to call a jam. He simply cannot bet and fold his hand. He has way too much equity, and there is a chance his opponent's making a move with some kind of draw. Now, I think I lean a little bit more towards a bet so that you can have some bet calls, but I don't hate the idea of checking, pot controlling, and going from there. And this is very different, in my opinion, than the pre-flop jam. When you bet here on the flop, you're going to face a lot of continues. You could have some pairs that check call. You can have some hands that check jam. So in this spot, I think your bet has substantially less fold equity and is much more likely to end up with you being all in than a pre-flop jam. Albertson does decide to go ahead and bet here on the flop. And yeah, I prefer the play. I think it's a good one. He's got a lot of equity. And now the action's back over to Ikeuchi. Facing a 1/3 pot bet, he certainly could decide to just go for the check call. I don't mind mixing that one in as well. If you check call here, your opponent might give up on a bunch of turns. You improve on a king, queen, 10, 8, even a club to where you might be able to call a turn bet with some of those turns. But I prefer a jam. Put him to the test. You guys are the 2 big stacks. It's much more risky for him. If you double your opponent here as Ikeuchi, well, you're still going to have 30-something million left behind. You're still going to be able to play some poker. He does decide to move in, and now back over to Albertson, and he's just visibly shook. He needs a second to even compose himself. And guys, this is why I give you the advice that I do here on Poker Hands. When you get deep in tournaments, you got to be ready for these spots. You can't be afraid of them. They're going to happen. At some point, if you play tournaments, you're going to be deep in one, and the money is going to matter to you because it's so many buy-ins, right? These spots are huge for these guys. We're talking about a difference between 260-ish K for 6th and 1.3 million for 1st. This is a seriously life-changing spot for some of these players. But you can't shy away from them. If you think you're going to get to these spots and crumble because you need the pay jump, don't play them. But luckily, Albertson collects his nerves and puts it in the middle.
Okay, Ikeuchi's posing for pictures over there while he's getting called as he turns around, and unbelievably, Albertson is going to have the best hand with ace high right now.
I love the way Ikeuchi played that, honestly. I really, really do. I think Albertson made a mistake. but we'll see if it works out for him.
111 million chip pot as the two big stacks are squaring off here. Corey Albertson, 2 overs, the nut flush draw, and the best hand right now up against the double gutter of Kazuki Ikeuchi, the chip leader coming in. The turn, a blank. Ikeuchi needs an 8, 10, or a queen. 9 outs once. Anything else, and Corey Albertson is going to have a massive runaway chip lead here. Ikeuchi looking to commemorate things. Is he taking video? Here comes the river. It's a 10!
Wow.
A pair of 10s for Kazuki Ikeuchi is going to bust Corey Albertson in 6th.
Wow. Let me go.
You can see the devastation on his face.
If you're looking for justice, play a different game. Thanks for joining me here today. I hope you enjoyed the analysis. Remember to click the subscribe button and join the team. I'll see you guys again soon.